The red and blue police lights pulsed against the raindrops on my windshield, turning the world into a rhythmic, blurring crime scene. I sat there, 32 years old, the CEO of a company I had built from a single laptop in a studio apartment, and I felt like a hollowed-out shell. My name is Jessica Banks. I live in Seattle, a city known for its gray skies, but today the gray felt like it was inside my lungs. I reached over to the passenger seat and touched the folder of legal documents, the ones that proved my father, Arthur Banks, had never been sick. The ones that proved the $450,000 life-saving surgery I had sold my life's work to fund was actually a down payment on a limited-edition Italian supercar for my brother Leo. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text from the family group chat. A photo. It was Leo, grinning like a shark, leaning against a Grigio Titanium Ferrari, holding a bottle of champagne. The caption from my father read, "Finally, a son who knows the value of loyalty. Some people give with their hands, but Leo gives with his heart. Enjoy the ride, son. You earned it." I didn't just feel angry. I felt a physical, searing heat behind my eyes that made my vision tunnel. I had spent the last 6 months sleeping on a cot in my father's sick room, smelling the cloying scent of the expensive humidifiers I'd bought him, listening to his wet, forced coughs that I now realized were nothing more than a theater performance. I had liquidated Banks Creative, a digital marketing firm that employed 20 people because he told me he had 4 months to live. I had looked into his eyes while he sat in that wheelchair, the one he probably bought at a thrift store for the aesthetic, and I had promised him I wouldn't let him die. He had squeezed my hand with trembling fingers and whispered, "You're a good girl, Jess. Not like your brother. He's too sensitive to see me like this." That was the hook. That was the lie he used to reel me in. He knew that all my life, I had been starving for a crumb of validation that wasn't overshadowed by Leo's potential. The humiliation didn't stop with a text. I drove to my father's house, my hands shaking so violently I could barely steer. I expected a quiet, somber home. Instead, the driveway was lined with cars. My Aunt Sarah, my cousins, and several of my father's golf buddies were there. Music was blaring, classic rock, my father's favorite. I walked through the front door, and the first thing I saw was Arthur. He wasn't in his wheelchair. He wasn't hooked up to the portable oxygen concentrator I had paid $3,000 for. He was standing in the center of the living room, a scotch in one hand, performing a rhythmic little jig to "Start Me Up" by the Rolling Stones. He looked healthier than I did. His skin was tan, his eyes were bright, and he was laughing, a deep, boisterous sound that used to make me feel safe but now sounded like a death knell. The room went silent when they saw me. I was wearing the same blazer I'd worn to the final signing of the liquidation papers. I looked like a ghost at my own funeral. "Jessica," my father bellowed, his voice booming without a hint of the respiratory distress he'd claimed only 72 hours ago. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He walked over and tried to put an arm around me, smelling of high-end cigars and Islay malt. "Don't look so grim, sweetheart. It's a celebration. The miracle happened. The doctors called. It was a misdiagnosis. A total fluke." He winked at the room and a few people chuckled. My Aunt Sarah looked away, her face flushing. She knew. They all knew. They were standing in a house filled with new furniture, eating catering that cost more than my monthly rent, bought with the blood, sweat, and tears of the company I had sacrificed. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice a low, dangerous hiss. "A misdiagnosis, Dad? Is that what we're calling it? 'Cause I have the bank records. I followed the wire transfer you said was going to the Swiss oncology clinic. Didn't go to Switzerland, Arthur. It went to a luxury dealership in downtown Los Angeles. It went to a VIN number registered to Leo Banks." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. My father's smile didn't drop, it just sharpened. He leaned in close, so close I could see the broken capillaries in his nose. "Now, Jessica," he whispered, his tone shifting from jovial to cold and transactional. "Don't be hysterical. You have plenty of money. You're a boss babe, right? You can just build another company. But Leo needed a win. He's had a hard few years, and a father has to look out for his legacy. You gave that money to save your father. Well, your father is saved. I'm happy. Why isn't that enough for you? Unless you're as selfish as your mother was. The mention of my mother was the slap I should have seen coming. She had died 10 years ago, leaving everything to him because she believed his lies too. I looked around the room, at my brother who was now standing in the doorway, key fob in hand, smirking at me with that lazy, entitled pout that had defined our childhood. I realized in that moment that I wasn't standing in my family home. I was standing in a den of thieves. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cold air fill the space where my heart used to be. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice eerily calm. "A father does have to look out for his legacy. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what yours is." I turned and walked out, the sound of Leo's mocking laughter following me into the rain. To understand why I fell for such a monstrous lie, you have to understand the architecture of the Banks household. Growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, the hierarchy was absolute. Arthur was the king, Leo was the prince, and I was the butler. My father ran a moderately successful construction firm, and he viewed every human relationship through the lens of utility. If you weren't useful to his image or his ego, you were invisible. Leo was the golden child because he looked exactly like my father, broad shoulders, jawline like a shovel, and a complete lack of a moral compass. I, on the other hand, was the bookish one. I was the one who got straight A's, won the debate championships, and worked a part-time job at 16 to pay for my own car. To my father, my achievements weren't points of pride. They were expected. They were my rent for occupying space in his world. I remember my 10th birthday vividly. I had saved up my allowance for 6 months to buy a specific Lego robotics kit. I wanted to be an engineer. On the morning of my birthday, my father walked into the kitchen with a large, wrapped box. My heart leaped. I thought for once he had seen me. I tore the paper open to find a set of expensive golf clubs. I was 10. I couldn't even lift the bag. "Leo needs to start practicing for the junior circuit," my father said, not even looking at me. "But it's my birthday, Dad," I whispered. He just patted my head, his eyes already on the television. "You're a girl, Jess. You'll get bored of robots in a week. This is an investment in the family. Now go help your mother with the dishes." That was the pattern. My milestones were repurposed to serve Leo's potential. The favoritism wasn't just about gifts, it was a psychological warfare of subtle exclusions. When Leo crashed the car I had bought with my own money at 17, my father didn't scold him. He told me I was selfish for being upset because Leo was going through a hard time with his girlfriend, and I should be grateful he wasn't hurt. When I got into my dream university with a partial scholarship, my father refused to pay the remaining tuition, claiming the business was in a slump. 2 weeks later, he bought Leo a brand new jet ski. I ended up working 3 jobs while taking 20 credits a semester. I remember the smell of stale coffee and the burning sensation in my eyes from pulling all-nighters, all while seeing photos on Facebook of my father and brother on fishing trips in the Keys. It wasn't just that he loved Leo more, it was that he enjoyed the power play of withholding from me. This environment turned me into a high achiever with a desperate, pathetic need to prove my worth. I started Banks Creative because I wanted to build something he couldn't touch. I wanted to be so successful that he would have to respect me. By 28, I was making mid-6 figures. I bought a house, I traveled, and I started to feel like I had escaped the gravity of his narcissism. But the butler in me never truly died. Every time he called, my heart would do a little hopeful skip. Is this the call where he says he's proud? Never was. It was always a request for a short-term loan for Leo's latest failed business venture, a bespoke beard oil line, a crypto mining farm in the garage, a luxury dog spa. I said no every single time, and every time my father would sigh and say, "You've become so hard, Jessica. Success has ruined your heart." You're just like those corporate sharks you work for. Then came the diagnosis. Started with a cough during Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago. A small, dry hack that he made sure to do whenever I was in the room. Then came the fatigue. He started canceling plans, claiming he was too weak to leave the house. He lost weight, which I now know was just a result of a trendy Ozempic prescription he'd managed to get for prediabetes. He played the long game. He waited until my company hit a major milestone, a $5 million valuation, before he dropped the bomb. He sat me down in his dimly lit study, the room smelling of menthol and medicinal herbs he'd strategically placed around. He showed me forged lab results on St. Jude's letterhead, claiming he had a rare form of stage 4 small cell carcinoma that had spread to his bones. The only hope is an experimental trial in Zurich, he'd said, his voice cracking with a practiced tremor. But it's not covered by insurance. It's $500,000 just to get on the list. I told Leo, and the poor boy, he's a mess. He can't handle this. He's been drinking, Jess. He's so fragile. He reached out and grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly firm for a dying man. You're the strong one. You're the one who can save this family. I know I haven't always been the father you deserved, but please don't let me die before I can make it up to you. He cried. Full tears. I watched a man I thought was an immovable mountain crumble in front of me, and the 10-year-old girl inside of me, the one who just wanted the Lego robots, took the wheel. I didn't even hesitate. I told him I'd find the money. I told him I'd sell everything. I thought I was buying my father's life. I didn't realize I was just financing my brother's midlife crisis. The months leading up to the sale of Banks Creative had been a masterclass in psychological warfare. I remember sitting in the glass-walled conference room of my firm, the Seattle skyline sparkling behind me like a promise I was about to break. My COO, Marcus, had been with me since the beginning. He was the one who helped me carry the first boxes into our original office. He looked at me like I had lost my mind when I told him we were entertaining a lowball acquisition offer. Jess, we just landed the Nordstrom account, he'd said, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. The valuation is going to double in 18 months. Why now? Why sell to a holding company that's going to gut our culture? I had looked him in the eye, my own eyes bloodshot from crying, and said, Because my father is dying, Marcus. And money is just paper, but he's my father. I remember the sound of the pen scratching against the paper during the final signing. It was a cold, clinical sound. I was signing away years of 80-hour work weeks, my employees' stability, and my own future. The first $450,000 in liquid cash hit my personal account 3 days later. I didn't even let the interest accrue for 24 hours before I initiated the wire to my father's medical trust. Each time I sent a payment, my father would send me a health update designed to keep the pressure high. He'd send selfies from what looked like a hospital waiting room. I now realize it was just the lobby of a high-end spa he frequented, wearing a surgical mask and looking exhausted. He'd tell me the experimental infusions were grueling. The radiation makes my skin feel like it's on fire, Jess, he'd text at 2 a.m. But I'm fighting. For you. You're the reason I'm still breathing. And I, like a desperate addict for his love, would reply with, Keep going, Dad. I'm working on the next transfer. I was living on ramen and caffeine, having moved out of my luxury condo to save on expenses while waiting for the business payout, while he was apparently scouting leather interior colors for Leo. I even sent an extra $10,000 for Leo's therapy, because my father claimed my brother was so distraught by the impending loss that he couldn't hold down his job at the gym. The first crack in the lie happened 3 weeks before the party. I had stopped by my father's house unannounced to bring him a specific type of organic bone broth he claimed was the only thing his chemo-ravaged stomach could digest. The house was dark, but I heard laughter and the clinking of glasses coming from the backyard. I walked around the side of the house, and through the narrow slats of the privacy fence I saw them. There was no wheelchair. There were no oxygen tanks. Arthur and Leo were sitting by the fire pit, smoking cigars and looking at a glossy brochure. I couldn't see the text, but I heard Leo's voice, clear and mocking. The Rosso Corsa is classic pop, but the Grigio Titanio looks more old money. If we're spending Jess's medical fund, we might as well look sophisticated when we pull up to the country club. My father laughed, that deep, healthy, belly-shaking roar that I hadn't heard in 6 months. She's so easy, Leo. You just have to tell her she's the strong one and give her a problem to solve. She's been trying to solve me since she was 5 years old. It's the best business deal I've ever made. She thinks she's a CEO, but she's just a golden goose with a guilt complex. I stood there, the warm jar of broth burning my palms through the paper bag, and I felt the world tilt. I wanted to scream. I wanted to kick the fence down and claw their eyes out. But a cold, crystalline instinct took over. The daughter died in that driveway, and the strategist woke up. I didn't confront them. I didn't let them know I was there. I quietly set the broth down on the porch, took a high-definition photo of them through the fence, grainy but unmistakable, and walked back to my car. My heart wasn't racing, it was slowing down. It was becoming a clock, ticking down the seconds until I could destroy them. I spent the next week playing the role of the grieving, exhausted victim. I even sent a final hardship payment of $20,000, but this time I did it through a private investigator's monitored escrow. I needed a clean paper trail that linked the medical request to the specific bank account used for the Ferrari purchase. I contacted an old friend from college who worked in medical billing and showed her the St. Jude's letterhead my father had given me. She took one look at it and snorted. "Jess, this font hasn't been used by St. Jude's in a decade. And this doctor? Dr. Eris Thorne? He's not an oncologist. He's a character from a daytime soap opera. Your dad literally copied a script from General Hospital." The humiliation was a physical weight, like lead in my veins, but it was being replaced by something sharper. My father had always told me I was too emotional for the big leagues. He was about to find out that when I stop feeling, I start winning. I began digging into his own finances, the real estate syndicate he ran with his golf buddies. I knew it was a house of cards, and I was about to pull the bottom card. I waited for the invitation to his miracle recovery party, knowing it was the last time he'd ever feel like he won. I spent that night drafting a very different kind of document. It wasn't a business plan. It was a forensic map of a felony. The breaking point, the moment the old Jessica truly burned to ash, happened 48 hours before the party. I called my father, my voice trembling with a carefully constructed hysteria. I told him the liquidation of Banks Creative hadn't just cost me my company, it had triggered a personal tax liability I couldn't cover. I told him I had lost my apartment and needed to move back into my old childhood bedroom for a few months until I could find a job. I waited for the response, my hand hovering over a digital recorder. "Oh, honey," he said, his voice dripping with that oily fake sympathy that used to make me feel loved. "I would love that truly. But the nurses need that space for the medical equipment. And Leo, well, Leo's moved in to be my full-time caregiver. He's sacrificing so much of his social life to be here for me, Jess. It's best if you stay with a friend. You're so independent, you'll figure it out. You always do." He was choosing a car over my shelter. He was choosing to keep his loyal son comfortable in a house I was essentially paying for, while I was looking at the back of my SUV as a potential bedroom. My father, the man who had spent months describing the agony of his imaginary bone cancer, couldn't even offer me a twin mattress in a guest room. I hung up the phone and didn't cry. I sat in my car and realized that for 32 years I had been trying to win a game where the rules were rigged against me. I was a liquidated asset to him. Leo was a preferred stock. I sat in the dark of my car, the steering wheel cold beneath my fingers, and I replayed every "I love you" he'd said during the illness. Each one was a transaction. Each one had a price tag of $50,000 or $100,000. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, haggard, thin, eyes shadowed with a fatigue that no amount of sleep could fix. I realized then that I didn't just want my money back. I wanted to see the look on his face when his legacy turned into a cage. I wanted to watch Leo realize that the keys to that Ferrari were made of sugar, and I was the rain. While they were planning a miracle celebration party, I was planning a funeral for their reputations. My father's ego was his greatest weakness, and I knew his social circle was built on the same lies he'd told me. Arthur Banks wasn't just a liar. He was a small-time fraudster. For years, he had been running what he called a private real estate syndicate with his golf buddies, men like Mr. Henderson and Dr. Miller. They gave him investment capital for development projects that never seemed to break ground. I had always stayed out of it, but now I used my CEO-level forensic skills to dig. I spent 18 hours straight in a public library, using their high-speed connection to pull property records, business filings, and tax liens. What I found was a gold mine of desperation. My father's construction company was a shell. He was using the money I gave him for cancer not just for Leo's car, but to pay off the interest he owed to Mr. Henderson to keep the syndicate from collapsing. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I was the one who had just been robbed. But the real twist, the one that made my blood run cold with a dark kind of joy, was the Ferrari itself. I called the dealership in LA, pretending to be my father's personal assistant confirming the insurance details. "Oh, yes," the salesman said, his voice smooth and eager. Mr. Banks was very specific. "The vehicle is registered under a family trust, but there was a slight issue with the secondary signatory's ID. 'Cause I had been the one to set up the original family trust years ago as a good daughter gesture to help with his estate planning, my name was still listed as the primary trustee. My father had forged my signature to authorize the purchase using the trust's name, thinking I'd never check because I was too busy grieving him. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had committed identity theft and bank fraud. He had handed me the rope, tied the noose, and stood on the chair. All I had to do was kick it. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. I wanted the public execution first. I contacted the local society columnist, a woman who loved a good miracle story, and told her about my father's inspirational journey from the brink of death. I told her the party on Saturday would be the perfect place for a big announcement regarding his health and the family's future. I made sure she'd be there with a photographer. Then I spent my last remaining credits to hire a mobile notary and a private process server. I wasn't just going to the party as a guest. I was going as the Reaper. The air at the miracle celebration was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the underlying grease of high-end catering. My father stood on the mahogany staircase, a glass of vintage Cristal in his hand, looking like a man who had never seen the inside of a hospital ward. He was wearing a $1,000 Italian suit, likely bought with the emergency pharmacy fund I'd wired him in April. Leo stood beside him, the Ferrari key fob clipped ostentatiously to his belt loop like a trophy. I walked in, not as the grieving daughter in a messy bun, but in a razor-sharp black power suit and heels that sounded like a countdown against the marble floor. The room went quiet. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked straight to the buffet table, picked up a spoon, and tapped it against a crystal flute until the ringing silenced even the background jazz. "Attention, everyone!" I shouted, my voice projecting with the authority of a woman who had run boardrooms while these men were playing at being rich. "I'd like to make a toast to my father, Arthur Banks, a man who truly defies the laws of science and the laws of the state." My father's face went from jovial to a sickly, pale gray. "Jessica, not now," he hissed, stepping down the stairs. But I was faster. I signaled to the caterer I'd hired, who was actually a licensed process server. He stepped forward and handed my father a thick stack of blue-backed legal documents. "Arthur Banks, you are being served with a civil suit for fraud, conversion of funds, and identity theft," the man said, his voice echoing in the sudden dead silence of the foyer. I turned to the crowd, specifically targeting Mr. Henderson and Dr. Miller. "And for those of you wondering where your investment returns went, you might want to look in the driveway. My father didn't have cancer. There was no Swiss clinic. There was only a $450,000 Ferrari and a web of forged documents." I pulled out my phone and tapped a command. The large 75-inch media screen in the living room, The one meant to show a slideshow of family memories, flickered to life. Instead of baby photos, it displayed a side-by-side comparison. The forged St. Jude's letterhead next to the script of the soap opera it was stolen from. Then the wire transfer records. Then the grainy photo of my dying father smoking a cigar and laughing about his golden goose. "He didn't just steal from me," I said, looking directly at the society columnist who was frantically scribbling in her notebook. "He stole from his friends to pay his debts, and he used his daughter's grief to buy his son a toy. Leo, honey, don't get too attached to the car. I've already filed an injunction. The family trust he used to buy it? I'm the sole trustee. I've already reported the vehicle as a fraudulent purchase. The repo truck is 10 minutes away." The explosion was magnificent. My father tried to lung at me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. No longer the feeble old man, but he was caught by his own investors who were now demanding answers about their money. Leo started screaming that I was ruining his life, to which I simply replied, "Get a job, Leo. I hear the gym is hiring janitors." I walked out of that house as the first sirens began to wail in the distance, not for me, but for the man who thought he could play me like a fool. It's been 6 months since the miracle turned into a felony. My father is currently navigating a nightmare of litigation and a looming grand jury investigation for his real estate syndicate. He lost the house. Leo lost the car and is currently living in a studio apartment above a laundromat, sending me blocked-caller voicemails about how family stays together. I delete them without listening. I lost my company, yes. I lost the $450,000 I worked a decade to earn. But as I sit here in my new, smaller office, a boutique consultancy where I only work with people I actually trust, I realize I gained something much more valuable. I gained the death of my own desperation. For 32 years, I was a prisoner to the hope that my father would one day love me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. That hope was the cage. The betrayal was the key. I spent tonight at dinner with Marcus and the core team from my old firm. We're rebuilding. Slower this time, more deliberate, and infinitely more honest. They are my chosen family. They didn't stay because I had a high valuation. They stayed because they saw me through the fire and didn't leave when the smoke got thick. I looked at my bank balance this morning. It's a fraction of what it was, but for the first time in my life, every cent of it belongs to me. There are no medical fees. There are no loans for Leo. There is just me, Jessica Banks, a woman who learned that the strong one doesn't have to carry the weight of a liar's world. I'm not a butler. I'm not a golden goose. I'm just a woman who finally chose herself, and honestly, the view from here is a lot better than the one from a Ferrari.